Nabila, thank you very much indeed for joining us on TalkSport. Just about 24 hours, I suppose, since those terrible scenes came onto our television screens from Port Said and the tragedy of what happened in the football stadium there, now possibly being linked to much more than a football disagreement and really kind of an illustration of the difficulties still going on within the new political system of Egypt. There's been more demonstrations over the course of the last few hours as well. What do you make of it all?
Well, as you rightly pointed out, the violence has continued with a vengeance, with today alone some 400 people injured in Cairo in fresh clashes between police and protesters because of the anger by the deaths of 74 people in Port Said. And now it seems that the dead people are not seen as football victims, but as martyrs of the revolution. And people are taking to the Interior Ministry, actually. They're trying to get to inside the ministry, the Interior Ministry, which is, of course, a symbol of the old regime, but also of the police. And the focus is on the politics now. The football tragedy is becoming a real political issue, with an attempt to get the military and the police not only to restore law and order, but also to put pressure on these two institutions to hand over power to a civilian government, as they promised they will do in June. But there are, of course, work concerns that this won't happen.
Is what happened at the football stadium an illustration of how, I suppose, delicate the whole situation still is? Because if it does turn out that the people who were doing or instigating a lot of the violence were the remnants, perhaps, of Hosni Mubarak's supporters and his old regime, then it shows that there's still quite a lot of problems there, right?
Well, of course, and I think, unfortunately, there will be social reasons as well for what has happened. And if you look, throughout the history of football, you will see bored, angry, and violent young men getting involved, in the game and using it to vent their frustrations. So I think it's broader than a political issue. And in my opinion, it's straightforward football hooliganism, which was the real cause of what happened in Port Said. But there is political exploitation of this unspeakable savage incident, which is now turning into a national political issue.
I mean, as far as the way that Egypt is now being run, we had elections towards the end of last year, and there will be more elections as we go into this year. What's the current status of the kind of the caretaker government, if you like? I mean, are they struggling to keep control of all of these different factions, or do you think that they're doing the right thing?
There have been attempts, to move towards, some sort of democratic structure in the post-Mubarak era. We've seen how, first parliamentary elections were held. A few days ago, the upper house of parliament was also elected, and they are going to draft a new constitution for Egypt. And of course, a president will be elected in June, and he will himself choose his own cabinet afterwards. So they are, moved towards a democratization of the country. But the main concern remains that, the military, who's very much still in charge of the country and who holds a massive stake in the economy, between 10 and 40% of the economy. Now, young Egyptians do not trust this institution at all, and there are theories that the military is exploiting tensions between different factions, including in the football arena, to cling on to power.
Right. And because I suppose this is now a year two from the beginning of the Arab Spring of last year, and the need and the want for democracy that a lot of the young people particularly wanted to see coming, and they used a lot of what you might call, I suppose, Western methods of social networking and Twitter and Facebook and all that kind of thing. I mean, is there a point at which you see that they will never be happy in some ways, the people, particularly young people of Egypt, they'll never be happy with authority, and it will be very difficult really for a system to grow up with their kind of with their grace, if you like?
I think, what young people want first and foremost is, a viable government that delivers on what is desperately lacking in Egypt, that is, jobs, essentially. You have, swathes of young people, idle young people with no jobs, and hence not able to bring food on the table. And it's no coincidence that in Egyptian Arabic you have the same word for bread and life, because bread is something that is not guaranteed in Egypt. And essentially what they're fighting for also is a restoration of their dignity, which they've been deprived of by, being treated like children effectively by years of dictatorships. And the fact that the military is very much a legacy of the old regime is something that is deeply worrying for Egyptian people.
Right. Now, had it not been for that terrible tragedy at the football ground yesterday in Egypt, Syria was still very much the kind of the focal point, I suppose, of the news from that part of the world in the last few weeks, because there's been an awful lot of terrible bloodshed that's been going on. There's been Arab League monitors going in and leaving, being accused of not doing much about it. The West being accused of not kind of getting involved in the same way that they did with Libya. There's currently a lot of conversations and discussions going on at the United Nations Security Council to try and find a solution, really, to perhaps move more towards what happened in Egypt and the removal of Hosni Mubarak. Syria really is a slightly different situation, though, isn't it?
It is, and the worsening situation in Syria is not, unfortunately, being matched by any kind of clarity in the diplomatic situation. In summary, we have Russia resisting Western demands that Bashar al-Assad, the Syrian leader, hands over power to his deputy as part of a United Nations-backed Arab peace plan. And the latest draft of the resolution being submitted to the UN Security Council has dropped the demand that Assad leaves, but still supports the political transition sought by the Arab League. And just as importantly, it has also dropped a demand to impose UN sanctions and a voluntary arms embargo on Damascus, effectively still allowing the Russians to sell weapons to the Syrian regime.
And the Russians only recently delivered quite a large shipment of weapons, did they not? And the West can see, I mean, we can all see on our television reports that the Syrian kind of military power is so big against the rebels that it's really not a very fair fight. Why do you think the West is so much more timid about interfering in Syria than it was in Libya?
Well, I think it's to do with several reasons. First of all, I would contend that there is, of course, Syria doesn't offer the vast resources in oil and gas that Libya offers, which was, in my opinion, one of the main motivations behind the military intervention in Libya. It was also Libya was also, much more isolated country in the region and a safer bet for military intervention. Syria is a much trickier scenario because military intervention in Syria would have international ramifications and will destabilize the whole country. We have the Tehran-Damascus axis because of the Shia connection. So Iran is a very powerful ally of Syria, and of course Russia is very much against a regime change in Syria because it's its last major ally in the region. And of course Lebanon has very close links with the Syrian regime as well. So, we're seeing almost in Syria, the case of Syria epitomizes a battle by proxy between the Shia countries in the region and the more Sunni-dominated countries in the region.
No, indeed, and from the Russian point of view, I suppose they want to have that ally because it's their last kind of point of the Mediterranean, isn't it? They've got a Mediterranean port there, which they feel is something that they want to hang on to. So, do you see President Assad continuing to remain in power then over the next few weeks and months?
Very much so, and anyone who has been following the situation in Syria over the past few months can see that Assad has no intention of disappearing whatsoever. And it's just not what Arab dictators do. And if he shows any weakness at all, it will be seized upon by his numerous enemy within Syria and those abroad.
Okay, well, we'll all be watching it, I'm sure, with a great deal of concern. But Nabila, thank you very much indeed for taking the time to talk to us.
Thank you.